this. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The first comment I'd like to make about road user charges in general is that earlier in the day I talked about the fact that Manawatu Gorge has been closed for a great length of time and is likely to be closed all the way through to December. And that has resulted in significant additional costs to some businesses and lost productivity. And one of the sources of those additional costs is in fact the road user charge, simply by way of the fact that vehicles have to travel a longer distance to take one of the two alternative routes to get around the Manawatu Gorge, and thus their road user charges increase as a result of that extra distance travelled, mostly getting between distribution points in Palmerston North over to the Port of Napier or distribution points over in the Hawke's Bay. And also, as another one of the effects is that these two roads are not really built for the type of traffic which is travelling on them currently. The normal traffic volumes are around about 600 vehicles a day on those two roads. Currently they're carrying 7,000 vehicles per day, and many of those are heavy diesel trucks carrying freight and goods between Palmerston North and Napier, and the effect on the road on both of those roads is now quite significant, and with that will come obviously additional costs in maintaining those roads. So I just thought that was an important point to make about road user charges. But part two, what we are concerned about in part two is that the argument in favour of shifting from a system of nominated weights to gross weights for the setting of road user charges hasn't really been set out. We haven't heard it articulated by the government why this change is necessary and how it's going to improve the system of road user charges. All we are clear on is that for many operators this is going to increase costs. And again, going back to the example of goods that would ordinarily be carried through the Manawatu Gorge, should a vehicle have to go from one point to the other carrying those goods and then have to travel back empty, then this is going to significantly increase those costs. And yes, okay, you could argue that this is an incentive for trucking firms to organise their logistics in a way that tries to ensure that those trucks are not travelling without any cargo on board, but often that is simply not possible. That's often the nature of the cargo and the nature of the points between which they are travelling means that, especially when a vehicle is specifically designed to carry a particular cargo, particularly liquids and gases, then it is not possible to ensure that a vehicle travels from point A to point B and then can pick up more load at point B and travel back to point A or on to another point. So it might be logistically possible for some firms to arrange their affairs in a way that is more efficient, but for many products, many loads, that is simply not possible. One of the other arguments that I recall from one of the submitters, I don't remember which submitter it was at Select Committee, was that vehicles, this might be an incentive for transportation firms, trucking firms, to ensure that their vehicles are fit for purpose, i.e. that they don't have a large vehicle carrying a small weight, much less than they are than that vehicle is capable of carrying. Which again, I suppose, on the surface of it sounds like a reasonably sensible argument, but for many trucking firms that would require a significant investment in capital and actually reduces flexibility for those firms. They have vehicles which are capable of carrying a range of weights, so that those vehicles can be flexible in the goods that they carry. and to require them to have a range of different vehicles that would be specific to the weight of and volume of goods that they need to carry would require a heck of a lot of investment, and for many operators I think would reduce their ability to, Mr Chair.
In Lees-Galloway.
Thank you, Mr Chair. To be flexible and to provide a flexible service to their customers. And so I suppose it's just that there needs to be an element of realism here in terms of what transportation firms are actually going to be able to do, whether we put those incentives in place or not. It's not clear in my mind, Mr Chair, whether that is actually the goal of this change or not, because as I said, I don't think the government has particularly articulated the case for making the change. That suggestion actually came from one of the submitters. Chris Hipkins also mentioned the issue of e-road or electronic registering of the road user charge, and what I've heard from a number of operators is that specifically because this legislation mandates the change from nominated weights to gross weights, they are less inclined to take up the ERUC option, because it is a cost outlay for them, which would make sense if they were able to reap the rewards of electronically monitoring a changing weight, and their road user charge could be purchased as they go according to the weight that they are carrying. But it makes no sense to make that investment in those electronic devices if they are not going to get that benefit, if their road user charge is going to be based on the gross weight of the vehicle. There's no advantage whatsoever of monitoring the weight of the vehicle and using an electronic system for doing that. So if we are trying to encourage transportation companies to shift into the electronic age and to make use of those sorts of systems, this is precisely the opposite thing to what we should be doing to achieve that. And that is direct feedback back from the industry, who are interested in innovation. They are interested in improving their efficiency, but they have to see a reasonable cost benefit from the investment that they would have to make. There is also some concern that driving trucking fleets down to smaller and smaller vehicles is going to... We will have a greater number of smaller vehicles on the road, and that could have impacts in terms of emissions and also vehicle congestion on the road. So given all the concerns related to what perhaps some of the unintended consequences of this change may be, I think it would be really useful for the Minister to articulate what the purpose is of this change, and I think that would be welcomed by members of the opposition, and then we could have a conversation about that once the Minister has explained that. So I'm going to take my seat, and hopefully the Minister will get to his feet.
Honourable